Did you watch the vice presidential debate? I did, and frankly, I was a bit disappointed. During the debate, I tweeted this. I tweeted some other things too, but I don't think any of them are worth including in this video. If you'd like to see them and other tweets, then subscribe to me on Twitter at RightWingGenius. But I wanted to talk to you today about some other things I noticed during and after the debate that I haven't heard talked about or seen written about much in the coverage of the debate. For example, did you notice that Biden kept saying stuff like, follow your instincts, folks, or go with your gut, or
Folks, use your common sense. Who do you trust on this? Folks, follow your instincts on this.
yeah. See, I love that because he's basically telling voters, folks, follow your instincts. Don't use your brain. Go with your gut. When you decide who to vote for, base your vote on the stereotypes we've worked so hard to cultivate. Just whatever you do, don't think about it that much, because if you base your vote on logic and reason, then we're screwed. Another thing he kept saying was get out of the way. I guess he wanted Ryan and congressional Republicans to get out of the way or something. Let's take a look at that.
If they get out of the way, if they get out of the way and let us pass the tax cut for the middle class, make it permanent. If they get out of the way and pass the jobs bill, if they get out of the way and let us allow 14 million people who are struggling to stay in their homes because their mortgages are upside down, but they never missed a mortgage payment, just get out of the way.
It would have been nice to hear Ryan throw that back at him and say something like, by the way, Joe, when you and the president are gunning for the fiscal cliff and ready to drive us off it, we're sure not going to get out of the way and let you take us off that fiscal cliff. We want to stop America from going over that fiscal cliff, and so we're going to keep fighting for the middle class of this country. I also thought it was interesting that when asked this question,
let me ask you what's worse. War in the Middle East, another war in the Middle East, or a nuclear armed Iran?
Ryan gave a direct answer, but Biden didn't. Paul Ryan actually flat out said a nuclear armed Iran is worse because it would inevitably lead to another war in the Middle East. But Biden, in characteristically garrulous form, spent a lot of time not answering the question. He dodged the question. Now, that stood out to me because if you're running to be a heartbeat away from the presidency and you need to convince voters that you would be prepared to assume the awesome powers and responsibilities of the presidency if anything should happen, if that should come to pass, then that is a question that you sure as hell better have an answer to. And I found it very telling that Joe Biden did not definitively say which was worse. I also thought that on this last question, or second to last question, one of the last questions having to do with abortion, Martha Raddatz asked this question.
If the Romney-Ryan ticket is elected, should those who believe that abortion should remain legal be worried?
Now, Paul Ryan gave a decent enough answer. It was concise, to the point, but it wasn't his best answer. Let me show Congressman Ryan how I would have liked to hear him answer that question with the help of a former presidential candidate.
If the Romney-Ryan ticket is elected, should those who believe that abortion should remain legal be worried?
No. Of course not. No.
Now, this actually brings me to something I saw after the debate on MSNBC. Lawrence O'Donnell was talking with Cecile Richards, the head of the Planned Parenthood Action PAC, or something having to do with Planned Parenthood, and get a load of this exchange between them.
Well, I think what I heard was a vice president who clearly has the experience, who was fact-based, was able to talk clearly about policies, and I thought Mr. Ryan did his best, but he talked about big, ideas and things with no detail. I think whether it was about war, whether it was about taxes, believing that we need to really, the wealthiest in this country need to pay a higher share so that we could get middle class tax relief. It was very clear to me, and I think that's what the voters heard tonight.
What does that have to do with sexual and reproductive health rights? Isn't that supposed to be what y'all are fighting for over there? I'm sorry, Cecile. I don't want to put words in your mouth or ascribe certain policy goals to you. I was just basing that on what it says on your website. Good Lord. Speaking of MSNBC's post-debate coverage, listen to what Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post told Chris Matthews. This is from a discussion they were having about the Libya debacle, and listen to what Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post told Chris Matthews about what seems to be the administration's constantly changing spin on this Libya debacle.
So what was their motive? They had no motive for saying it was one thing if it was really another, and they knew it was another. I mean, they didn't know what had happened.
Really, Gene, you don't understand why they might be reluctant to acknowledge that there was a terrorist attack on U.S. soil that killed 4 Americans, including a U.S. ambassador, less than 2 months before an election. You really don't see why the administration might not want to admit that, especially having just spent 3 days in Charlotte and countless hours on the campaign trail boasting about how Al-Qaeda was on the path to defeat and they'd been decimated. Do you honestly think the administration was not reluctant to acknowledge that there had been a terrorist attack on their watch in which 4 Americans died? By the way, I am so sick of hearing about all Joe Biden's foreign policy experience. Let me ask you something. Does foreign policy experience really count for much when you've been wrong as often as Joe Biden has? To that point, I do hope the Republicans or the Romney-Ryan campaign or somebody is going to use this in a campaign ad.
We are going to not repeat the mistakes we made in the past.
We're not going to repeat the mistakes we've made. That should be the Republican message to voters. Don't repeat the mistakes you made in 2008. For God's sakes, look at the consequences. We need to take this country in a different direction. Better future. Finally, I do want to point out that Paul Ryan did not go after Joe Biden for repeating the abominable lie that President Obama ended the war in Iraq. I hope that Mitt Romney will hit the president on that, but not unprompted, only if he tries to claim credit for ending the war in Iraq during the third debate, the foreign policy debate. I have made it clear that I think this is a very insulting lie that the president has been telling, and I want Mitt Romney to hit him on this because this is something that cannot go unanswered. Let me know what you think. Post a comment below, post a video response, check out my blog. I've actually got some good, I think, concise articles up there now, a couple out in the last week analyzing the presidential race and putting it in historical perspective, looking at statistics, parsing the polls and whatnot. So I'd really like to have people check those out. And other than that, don't mess with the right-wing genius.